Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The October evening descended upon Hogwarts in soft purple shadows as Lily Evans sat by the window in the Gryffindor common room, gazing out at the lake where the last glimmers of sunlight danced upon the waves. In her hands lay an unfinished essay on potions, but her thoughts were far from the properties of valerian root. A week remained until Professor Slughorn's birthday, and Lily still had no idea what to give him. She ran her fingers through her hair, loosening the red curls that glowed in the firelight. The other sixth years had already dispersed to their various pursuits. Marlene McKinnon and Dorcas Meadows were discussing tomorrow's defense against the dark arts exam, whilst James Potter was once again trying to catch her attention, demonstrating a complex levitation charm by lifting all the cushions in the room simultaneously into the air. Lily couldn't help but smile at his persistence, but quickly returned to her own thoughts. What could one give to a person who seemed to have everything? Professor Horace Slughorn was more than just a potions teacher. He was the one who had seen potential in her from the very first day, when she, a frightened Muggle-born girl, had first crossed the threshold of his dungeon. 6 years ago, she had feared that she wouldn't be able to match the pureblood wizards, that her heritage would stand in the way of success in the magical world. But Professor Slughorn had immediately seen something in her that others had not. In that very first lesson, when she had perfectly brewed a boil-cure potion, his eyes had gleamed with delight. "Miss Evans," he had said then, approaching her cauldron, "this is incredible. Such perfect color, such consistency. You have a natural talent for potion making, my dear." And from that day forth, he had never allowed anyone to belittle her because of her blood status. When Severus Snape had still been her best friend, rather than the one who had called her a mudblood in front of the entire school, the professor had often praised them both, calling them my most talented students. But even after her friendship with Severus had shattered, Slughorn had continued to support her, inviting her to his famous parties, introducing her to influential people in the wizarding world. "You have a bright future ahead of you, Lily," he often told her. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." It was thanks to his support that she had felt confident among her classmates from ancient wizarding families. It was he who had helped her believe in her abilities. And now, at 17, when she had become a prefect and one of the best students in her year, she wanted to repay him for all the kindness he had shown her. But what could one give to a person who collected rare sweets, possessed a collection of crystal goblets, and received gifts from his former students who had become influential wizards? Lily mentally sorted through various options. A book. The professor had an enormous library. A rare potion? He was himself a master of potion making. Something expensive? She didn't have such money, and besides, Slughorn had never valued things by their cost. No, it needed to be something personal, something that came from the heart. Something that would show how grateful she was for his mentorship and faith in her. Lily rose from her chair and approached the window. The moon had already risen above the forbidden forest, silvering the treetops. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep through her skin. Somewhere deep within her soul, an idea was beginning to form, still hazy but already tangible. What if she were to create something herself? Something unique, something no one else could give him? The professor had always admired her abilities in potion making, but perhaps it was time to show him that she had mastered not only the art of brewing potions, but other magical disciplines as well. Transfiguration. The thought suddenly illuminated her consciousness like lightning in a dark room. Professor McGonagall had often said that Lily had a talent for transfiguration, particularly for transformations involving living nature. What if? Lily narrowed her eyes, imagining something beautiful and symbolic. Her name, Lily. The lily flower had always been her favorite, not only because of her name, but because of the beauty and purity it embodied. And Professor Slughorn loved all things living, everything that grew and flourished. His office always contained pots of rare plants necessary for potions. What if she were to transform a lily flower into something living, but different? Into a little fish, perhaps? Something beautiful that could swim in an aquarium on his desk, reminding him of her and her gratitude? It would be symbolic, Lily's flower, transformed by magic into a living creature that would bring joy to her beloved professor. Lily's heart beat faster with excitement. This was the perfect idea. Personal, unique, and requiring true mastery. The professor would surely understand the symbolism of such a gift. But then the euphoria dimmed somewhat as Lily realized the complexity of the task. Transfiguration of living beings was one of the most difficult branches of magic. Even McGonagall often emphasized how dangerous and difficult it was. To transform a non-living object into a living one was already advanced magic, but to transform one living being into another. Well then, Lily whispered, clenching her fists. I'll try. For Professor Slughorn, I'll try. The next morning, before breakfast, Lily crept into Professor Sprout's greenhouses. Autumn was particularly beautiful there. The last flowers of the season bloomed in the magical warmth created by spells. Among the various plants, Lily found what she was seeking, a bush of white lilies that bloomed with large, perfect flowers. Forgive me, she whispered, carefully cutting one flower. You'll become something beautiful, I promise. With the flower in hand, she returned to the castle and found an empty classroom on the third floor. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, creating perfect lighting for magic. Lily placed the flower on a desk and drew her wand. Something simple first, she told herself. Just change the color. She pointed her wand at the white lily and whispered a color-changing charm. The flower instantly became golden, then red, then white again. This was easy. She had been performing such transfigurations since her second year. Now something more difficult, Lily murmured. Let's change the shape. The form-changing charm was more complex. One needed to clearly visualize the end result and have sufficient magical power to maintain the transformation. Lily concentrated, imagining the lily's petals transforming into something else. Into a little fish with delicate fins. Mutatio forma, she pronounced clearly, feeling the magic flow through her wand. The flower trembled, its petals beginning to move and change. For a moment, Lily thought she had succeeded. The form was indeed changing, taking on the outline of a small fish. But then something went wrong. The transformation began to flicker unstably, like a broken portrait trying to restore itself. The fish form collapsed, and on the desk lay the lily once more, but now it was wilted and resembled something that had been boiled in hot water. No, 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 Lily exclaimed in frustration. What am I doing wrong? She tried again, this time concentrating harder, imagining every detail of the future fish. The result was slightly better. The form held longer, but again collapsed after several minutes. Third attempt. Fourth. Fifth. With each try, Lily became increasingly frustrated. The flower either didn't transform at all, or the transformation proved unstable. And once something truly horrible happened, instead of a fish, there emerged some monstrous mass that resembled both plant and animal simultaneously. Perhaps I'm rushing too much? Lily asked herself, wiping sweat from her brow. The magic was exhausting her, yet there were still no results. She sat at the desk and looked at the ruined flower. Perhaps the idea had been too ambitious. Perhaps she had overestimated her abilities. Professor McGonagall had always said that transfiguration of living beings required not only magical power, but also deep understanding of the essence of what you were transforming. Maybe Lily simply didn't know enough about how it was done. But she didn't want to give up. Not after the idea had seemed so perfect to her. Professor Slughorn deserved something special, and she would find a way to do it. Very well, Lily said, rising and putting away her wand. I need help. Real help from someone who knows more about transfiguration than I do. She looked at the clock on the wall. Half an hour remained before lessons began. If she hurried, she could have breakfast and think about whom to turn to for advice. Leaving the classroom, Lily felt that despite the failures, she was on the right path. The idea of transforming a lily into a fish was good. She simply needed to better understand the process. And at Hogwarts, one could always find someone who knew the answers to the most difficult questions. Professor Slughorn would receive his special gift. Lily was certain of it. In the Great Hall, the usual morning bustle reigned. Owls arrived with mail, students chattered over breakfast, and the professors sat at the high table discussing something important. Lily noticed Professor Slughorn. He was animatedly conversing with Professor Flitwick, waving a piece of toast about. His round cheeks were red with pleasure, and his eyes sparkled with their usual optimism. Looking at him, Lily felt even more determined in her decision. Yes, the gift would be special. She just needed to find the right approach. Marlene McKinnon waved to her from the Gryffindor table, and Lily went to have breakfast, pondering her plan of action. Today they had transfiguration with Professor McGonagall. Perhaps after the lesson, she could ask for a private consultation. And also, Lily suddenly thought of Severus. Once they had spent hours together discussing the most complex aspects of magic, Severus had always known far more about transfiguration than many other students. Even after their friendship had ended, she couldn't deny his talent. But could she turn to him for help? After everything that had happened between them, Lily nervously twisted a curl of hair around her finger. Perhaps it was worth trying, for the sake of Professor Slughorn, who had once believed in them both. The decision ripened in her mind gradually but confidently. She would find a way to create the perfect gift, even if it meant overcoming her pride and asking for help from her former friend. But first, the transfiguration lesson. Perhaps Professor McGonagall would inadvertently give her a clue about how to handle such a complex transformation. Lily finished her breakfast and headed to class, feeling determination kindle in her chest. The day was only beginning, and she already knew it would be full of challenges and opportunities. The following 3 days Lily devoted to the most meticulous experiments of her life. If her first attempts in the empty classroom had been merely reconnaissance, she now decided to approach the matter systematically. On Thursday morning, whilst the other students still slept, she crept once more into Professor Sprout's greenhouses and carefully gathered an entire collection of flowers. Not only lilies, but also roses, daffodils, tulips, and even several magical plants with special properties. If I want to create a living fish from a flower, she reasoned, arranging her collection on a table in the library, in the quiet corner between the sections, Advanced Transfiguration and History of Magic, then I need to better understand which flowers are best suited for such transformation. Madame Pants had not yet arrived at work, so Lily could peacefully unfurl her illegal laboratory amongst the ancient tomes. She drew out a small notebook and neatly wrote, Experiment number 1, White Lily Goldfish. This time she decided to proceed step by step. First change the flower's color to golden, then gradually transform the shape, and only then attempt to give it the properties of a living creature. Lily breathed in deeply the aroma of old books and parchment, pointed her wand at the white lily, and whispered the color-changing charm. The flower obediently transformed to a beautiful golden shade that reminded her of morning sunlight on the lake's surface. Encouraged by success, Lily moved to the next stage. Mutatio forma piscis, she pronounced clearly, concentrating on the image of a small golden fish with delicate fins. The transformation began promisingly. The lily's petals began to curl and elongate, taking on the outline of a fish's body. The stem transformed into a tail, and the stamens became small fins. Lily held her breath in delight. This was almost working, but when she tried to grant the creature life with the Vita Animalis spell, something went catastrophically wrong. The flower fish suddenly began to grow, increasing in size at a mad rate. Within seconds it had become the size of a cat, then a dog, then... Oh no! Lily gasped as the mutant flower, now the size of a small cow, began thrashing about on the table, destroying everything in its path. Quickly uttering finite incantatum, she stopped the spell, and the monster crumbled into a heap of golden petals that slowly fell to the library floor like strange snow. Experiment number 1, failure. Reason did not account for the ratio of magical energy to object size, Lily wrote in a shaking hand. For her next attempt, she decided to use a smaller flower. A small white daffodil seemed a more manageable object. This time Lily tried a different approach. Instead of immediately granting life, she decided first to create an illusion of movement. Mobiliarbus, she whispered, adapting the plant-moving spell for her needs. The daffodil did indeed begin to move, but not as a fish moves. It crawled across the table like some clumsy caterpillar, leaving behind a trail of pollen and torn petals. When it reached the edge of the table and fell to the floor with a pitiful rustle, Lily couldn't help but laugh softly, despite her disappointment. Experiment number 2, partial failure. Movement exists, but not the right kind, she recorded. The third attempt with a red rose proved even more unexpected. When Lily tried to combine shape transformation with life-granting in one complex spell, the rose did indeed transform into something that vaguely resembled a fish. But instead of swimming, this creature sang. A thin, melodic voice filled the library's silence, performing something like a song about the beauty of morning dew. The sound was so unexpected and simultaneously beautiful that Lily completely forgot about her task for several minutes, listening entranced to the magical trills. Though it's beautiful, she murmured when the singing fish rows finally fell silent. Professor Slughorn would hardly want something that would sing in the middle of lessons. By lunchtime, Lily had used up half of her collected flowers, and her notebook was filled with descriptions of increasingly strange failures. There had been a flowerfish that tried to burrow into the earth like a mole. There had been another that transformed into something resembling a jellyfish and simply lay on the table, periodically pulsing with multicolored lights. And the most unusual experiment had resulted in a creature that looked like a fish but smelled like a bouquet of flowers and left a trail of petals behind it. Perhaps the problem is that I'm using entirely the wrong spells? Lily mused thoughtfully as she cleared away traces of her experiments. The next day, she decided to try a completely different approach. Instead of transforming flowers into fish, why not try creating an aquarium first, and then think about its inhabitants? On Friday after lessons, Lily found an empty classroom on the 5th floor and brought there a glass jar from the kitchens, one of those in which the house elves stored pickled cucumbers, several stones from the lake shore, and a bunch of water plants she had carefully gathered near the jetty. Right then, she said to herself, setting up the jar on the windowsill where soft afternoon sunlight fell upon it. First I'll create the perfect environment for life, and then I'll think about the life itself. She filled the jar with lake water, carefully arranged the pebbles on the bottom, and planted the water plants. Then she tried casting a water purification charm, so it would always remain clear, and a temperature-maintaining charm, so the fish would be comfortable. The first few spells worked wonderfully. The water became crystal clear, and the jar began to glow softly from within, creating a cozy atmosphere. Lily even tried adding a light charm that created the illusion of water movement, as if there were an invisible current inside. "This is better already," she exclaimed with delight, looking at her homemade aquarium. Now all that remains is to create an inhabitant for this beauty. But when she pointed her wand at one of her remaining lilies and tried to transform it directly in the water, disaster struck. Instead of gradual transformation into a fish, the lily suddenly exploded like a mine, spattering Lily and the entire classroom with a mixture of water, petals, and some incomprehensible green slime. "Ugh!" Lily cried out, wiping slime from her face. "What was that?" It turned out that the magical water from the lake had special properties that had reacted unpredictably with her transfiguration spell. Instead of harmonious transformation, a magical reaction had occurred, similar to what sometimes happened with unstable potions. When Lily finally cleaned up the classroom, this took a good hour and countless cleansing charms. She sat on the floor and sighed heavily. She had only a few flowers left, and 4 days remained until Professor Slughorn's birthday. "Perhaps I'm approaching this from entirely the wrong angle," she murmured thoughtfully. Saturday began with a new idea. If the problem was the complexity of simultaneous transformation and life-granting, perhaps she should separate the process? First create a perfect fish form from non-living material, and then separately grant it life. Lily found a small plasticine figure in the castle, obviously forgotten by some younger student, and decided to try with it. In the library, in that same quiet corner, she began working on creating a perfect fish model. "Mutatio forma," she whispered, and the plasticine obediently transformed into a small fish figure with perfect proportions. "Coloris aureus," she added, and the figure became golden. "Textura naturalis," and the figure's surface became like real scales. The result looked incredibly realistic. If not for the fact that the fish didn't move or breathe, it could have been mistaken for real. Encouraged by success, Lily prepared for the most difficult part. "Vita animalis," she pronounced, putting all her will and imagination of what a living fish should be into the spell. For a moment it seemed everything had succeeded. The figure trembled, its gills began to move almost imperceptibly, and its eyes lit up with living radiance. Lily held her breath in delight. And then the fish opened its mouth and spoke in a human voice. "Excuse me, dear miss, but could you perhaps explain to me who I am and what I'm doing here?" it asked most politely. Lily jerked back so sharply she nearly fell from her chair. You're speaking," she whispered. "Of course I'm speaking," replied the fish, turning around, though it still lay on the table rather than swimming. "Is that strange? I feel that I have a mind, therefore it's logical that I can speak. Though I confess, I don't quite understand why I can't breathe underwater. That's not very convenient for a fish, is it?" Lily realized the horror of the situation. She had created not simply a living fish, but an intelligent creature with its own consciousness. And this was quite different from the result she had been striving for. "Listen," she said to the fish, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm very sorry, but I think I've made a mistake." "A mistake?" the fish wondered. What exactly was the mistake? That I exist? This question touched upon the deepest ethical problems of magic, which Lily had never even considered until she encountered them directly. Did she have the right to correct her mistake if it meant destroying an intelligent being? No, she said hastily. Your existence isn't a mistake. The mistake was that I didn't give you the ability to breathe underwater. Oh, that can be fixed, the fish replied cheerfully. I can sense that you're a very powerful witch. Surely this won't be difficult for you. Lily spent the next hour trying to modify her spell so the fish could breathe underwater. When this finally succeeded, and the fish swam happily in an improvised aquarium, Lily had to quickly transfigure her inkwell. A new question arose. What to do with it? I can't give Professor Slughorn an intelligent creature, Lily reasoned. That would be like slavery. Who is Professor Slughorn? The fish asked with interest, circling in its small pool. When Lily told her about her intentions, the fish became thoughtful. You know what? It said finally. Why don't I become a gift voluntarily? You say this professor is a good person who loves all living things. Perhaps he'd be pleased to have an intelligent companion. I could help him with potion making, tell interesting stories to students. The idea was tempting, but Lily felt this wasn't quite what she had wanted to create. Professor Slughorn would be impressed, but would he understand the gift's symbolism if the fish could tell him about itself? Eventually, after long deliberation, Lily proposed an alternative to the fish. What if I help you find your own path in life? She said. There's a pond near Hagrid's hut where various magical creatures live. Perhaps you'd be better there? The fish agreed, and that very evening Lily carefully carried her to the pond, where she swam happily amongst the grindylows and water hippopotamuses. Thank you for life, the fish said in farewell. I hope you find the right way to please your professor. Returning to the castle, Lily sat in the Gryffindor common room and took stock of her experiments. Her notebook already contained 2 pages of failures, and she felt even more confused than at the beginning. Perhaps the problem wasn't in technique, but in approach. Perhaps she was trying to run before she could walk. Transfiguration of living beings was complex magic even for experienced wizards, and she was only a 6th-year student. Sunday brought the final series of experiments before Lily finally admitted she needed professional help. She tried using various magical catalysts, moonstone crystals to enhance transfiguration, powdered silver root to stabilize spells, even a drop of unicorn blood she managed to obtain from the school medical supplies. The results were varied, but none were what she needed. One fish glowed in the dark, so brightly it could be used instead of a lantern. Another had the ability to change color depending on the mood of those around it. A third could become invisible, but gave itself away with constant melodic gurgling. All of this is very beautiful and magical, Lily sighed, looking at her collection of unusual creatures, but it's not what should stand on Professor Slughorn's desk. What saddened her most was that with each experiment she became increasingly convinced that creating a simple, beautiful fish that would swim in an aquarium and remind the professor of her was proving far more complex than it had seemed at first. On Sunday evening, when only 3 days remained until the professor's birthday, Lily sat in the library surrounded by a pile of transfiguration books. Fundamentals of Living Transfiguration by Professor Wilkes, Magical Transformations and Their Consequences by Madame Grimm, Creating Life, Ethics and Technique by Dr. Stone. She had read them all, but the practical advice proved too complex for her level. To create stable living transfiguration, deep understanding of the biological processes of the target organism is necessary, she read aloud from one of the books. The wizard must accurately imagine not only the creature's external appearance, but also the workings of its internal organs, metabolic peculiarities, characteristic behavioral patterns. Lily closed the book and put her head in her hands. This information only confirmed what she had already understood from her own experience. The task she had set herself required far more knowledge and experience than she possessed. I need help, she whispered into the library's silence. Real, professional help. But whom to turn to? Professor McGonagall certainly knew more about transfiguration than anyone else in the castle, but Lily was embarrassed to confess her ambitious, perhaps ill-considered plans to her. What if the professor said such a task was too complex for a student? And then Lily remembered Severus. Once, when they had still been friends, he had always known answers to the most complex magical questions. His understanding of magic's theoretical aspects had been impressive even to professors. And if anyone might know how to stabilize complex transfigurations, it was him. But could she swallow her pride and turn to him after everything that had happened between them? After that word he had flung at her in front of the entire school? Lily looked at the clock. It was already late. Most students had gone to bed. 3 days remained until Professor Slughorn's birthday, and she still didn't have a gift worthy of such a kind person. The decision ripened gradually but confidently. For the sake of Professor Slughorn, for the sake of a gift that was meant to embody her gratitude, she was ready to overcome personal grievances and ask for help from the best theoretical magician among Hogwarts students. Tomorrow she would speak with Professor McGonagall, and if necessary, with Severus as well. Professor Slughorn's gift would be created, even if it meant forgetting about pride and asking for help from her former best friend. Monday morning greeted Lily with gray skies and drizzling rain that tapped softly against the great hall windows. She sat at the Gryffindor table, listlessly stirring her porridge with a spoon whilst trying to gather courage for her conversation with Professor McGonagall. Only 2 days remained until Professor Slughorn's birthday, and time was slipping away relentlessly, like sand through fingers. "You look as though you haven't slept all night," observed Marlene McKinnon, sitting down beside her with her plate of toast. "Everything all right?" Lily looked up from her barely touched food. She had indeed slept poorly, fretting about the upcoming conversation with the Transfiguration professor. How could she explain that she wanted to create a living creature from a flower without seeming presumptuous or thoughtless? "Just thinking about a complicated project," she replied, smiling at Marlene. "Nothing serious." But when the bell rang, announcing the start of the first lesson, Lily's heart began beating faster. Transfiguration. Today they were to study the transformation of inanimate objects into living ones, which was an odd coincidence, as if fate itself were nudging her towards a conversation with Professor McGonagall. The Transfiguration classroom was filled with morning light streaming through tall windows and reflecting off countless glass jars filled with various specimens for demonstration. Professor McGonagall stood by the blackboard, upon which were drawn complex diagrams showing the flow of magical energy. "Today we shall examine one of the most difficult branches of transfiguration," she began in a stern but captivated voice. "The creation of living creatures from inanimate objects. This is magic that requires not only technical mastery, but also deep understanding of the very essence of life." Lily felt shivers run down her spine. Incredible. The professor was speaking about precisely what she had been struggling with all the previous week. "Who can name the fundamental principles of such transfiguration?" asked McGonagall, surveying the class with her stern gaze. Lily raised her hand, feeling excitement mingle with nervousness. "Yes, Miss Evans? Professor, to create a living creature, the wizard must accurately imagine not only the external appearance of the target organism, but also all its internal processes," replied Lily, recalling what she had read in the library. "Breathing, circulation, digestion, the nervous system." "Excellent," McGonagall nodded approvingly. "And what else?" "The magical energy must be precisely balanced," Lily continued, feeling more confident. "Too little, and the creature won't be able to sustain vital functions. Too much, and it might become unstable or—" She remembered her mutant flower, unpredictable in size. "Absolutely correct, Miss Evans." Professor McGonagall was looking at her with interest. "You seem to have studied this topic well. Do you have a practical interest in this sort of magic?" Lily felt herself blushing. This was the perfect opportunity to broach the subject of her project, but in front of the entire class. "Possibly, Professor," she answered carefully. "I should like to learn more about the practical aspects." McGonagall nodded and turned back to the blackboard, but Lily noticed how her lips curved in the slightest of smiles. For the rest of the lesson, the professor spoke about theoretical foundations, demonstrating simple examples, transforming a pebble into a beetle, which lived only a few minutes, and a paper bird into a real sparrow, which immediately flew out the window and never returned. "As you can see," McGonagall summarized at the lesson's end, "even the simplest living transfigurations require constant concentration to maintain them. To create a creature that will exist independently, without constant magical support from the wizard, this is a task of master-level transfiguration." When the other students began packing their things, Lily gathered courage and approached the teacher's desk. "Professor McGonagall, might I speak with you after lessons? I have a theoretical question about transfiguration." McGonagall looked at her keenly through her spectacles. Theoretical, you say? There was light irony in her voice. Certainly, Miss Evans. Remain after the final lesson. The day dragged on endlessly. In potions, Lily could barely concentrate on preparing a wound-healing potion, constantly thinking about the upcoming conversation. Professor Slughorn, as always, was in good spirits, telling anecdotes about his youth and praising students for successful potions. When he complimented her on the particularly elegant shade of violet in your potion, my dear, Lily felt a pang of guilt. Here was this kind person for whom she was trying to create a special gift, yet so far she had achieved nothing. Defense against the dark arts passed in a haze. Professor Quirrell was muttering something about protective charms against dark creatures, but Lily was thinking only about how best to phrase her request to McGonagall. Finally came the time of the last lesson. When the classroom emptied, Lily approached the teacher's desk, where McGonagall was sorting student work. "Well then, Miss Evans," said the professor without looking up from the parchments. "Tell me about your theoretical question." Lily took a deep breath. "Professor, I want to create a gift for Professor Slughorn for his birthday. Something special that would show my gratitude for all his support," she began. "I thought, what if I were to transform a lily flower into a little fish? It would be symbolic, my name, transformed by magic into something living and beautiful." McGonagall finally looked up and studied her intently. "An ambitious idea," she said restrainedly. "And judging by your knowledge in today's lesson, you've already attempted to implement it independently?" Lily blushed. "Yes, Professor. Last week I conducted experiments, but the results were unusual." "Unusual?" McGonagall raised an eyebrow. "Tell me more." And Lily told everything. About the mutant flower that grew to gigantic proportions. About the singing fish rose. About the intelligent fish that now lived in the pond near Hagrid's hut. About all her failed attempts to create simply a beautiful, ordinary fish that could swim in an aquarium. McGonagall listened attentively, and Lily was surprised to notice that the professor didn't even look angry. Rather, intrigued. "You created an intelligent creature with its own consciousness?" she asked when Lily had finished. "And you resolved this ethical dilemma by finding it a suitable living environment?" "Yes, Professor. It seemed wrong to me to destroy something that already had its own thoughts and feelings." McGonagall nodded with approval. "This shows wisdom, Miss Evans. Many experienced wizards don't consider the ethical consequences of their experiments." She stood from behind her desk and approached the window, looking at the rain that still drizzled. "Your problem isn't a lack of magical power or technical skill. The problem is that you're trying to create something that appears simple, but is actually extraordinarily complex." "What do you mean, Professor?" "An ordinary fish, Miss Evans, is the result of millions of years of evolution. Every cell in its body, every reflex, every behavioral reaction, all of this is calibrated with incredible precision." McGonagall turned back to Lily. "When you attempt to reproduce this with magic, you are essentially trying to repeat the work of nature itself." Lily felt hope melting in her chest. "So it's impossible?" "Not impossible, but extraordinarily difficult." McGonagall returned to her desk and drew a small leather-bound book from a drawer. "There is a way to simplify the task. Instead of creating a complete living fish from scratch, one can use the existing life force of the flower and simply redirect it." She opened the book to a particular page and showed Lily a complex diagram. "This is called transformation of life essence," the professor explained. "You don't create new life, but transform what already exists. The flower remains alive but takes on the form and, to some extent, behavior of a fish." Lily studied the diagram with fascination. It was complex, with numerous symbols and markings she didn't understand. "But this is still quite advanced magic," McGonagall continued. "It requires deep understanding of the biological processes of both organisms, plant and animal, as well as knowledge of specific stabilization spells that aren't taught at school." Lily's heart sank again. "So I won't be able to do it?" McGonagall looked at her thoughtfully. "Perhaps you could, if you found someone to help you with the theoretical part," she said finally. "Someone who deeply understands the interaction of different forms of magic and could assist with spell stabilization calculations." Lily immediately thought of Severus, but didn't dare name him. "Professor, couldn't you?" "Unfortunately, no." McGonagall shook her head. "I have far too much to do before the holidays. But I can give you several books for independent study. And perhaps," she became thoughtful, "perhaps one of your yearmates could help. Someone with particular abilities in theoretical magic." Now Lily was certain that McGonagall was hinting at Severus. But the professor was too tactful to name names, especially knowing about the complicated relationship between the former friends. "I'll think about it," said Lily. "Thank you for the advice, Professor." McGonagall gave her several books on advanced transfiguration and reminded her once more about caution. "Remember, Miss Evans, that even with help this will be a difficult task. Don't risk more than necessary. Professor Slughorn will value any gift made with love." Leaving the classroom, Lily wandered the castle corridors for a long time, pondering what she had heard. In her hands were books that could help, but without support from someone who better understood magical theory, she would hardly manage to do everything in the remaining 2 days. And the only person at school who had sufficient knowledge for such a task was Severus Snape. Lily stopped by a window overlooking the courtyard. The rain had finally stopped, and evening sunlight was breaking through the clouds, painting everything around in golden hues. Somewhere out there, perhaps in the dungeons or the library, was the boy who had once been her best friend. The boy who knew more about magic than many adult wizards. But between them stood that horrible word he had flung at her in front of the entire school. Mudblood, the word that had shattered their friendship and shown how different they had become. But this was for Professor Slughorn, for the person who had believed in her when she hadn't believed in herself, for a gift that was meant to embody her gratitude. Was it worth swallowing her pride for this? Lily watched the setting sun and gradually came to the conclusion that yes, it was worth it. Professor Slughorn deserved a special gift, even if creating it meant she had to swallow her hurt and ask for help from her former best friend. But first she would try once more on her own, with the new books from McGonagall. Perhaps now, having proper theoretical knowledge, she could manage without outside help. That evening Lily settled in the library with the books McGonagall had given her. Transformation of life essence, theory and practice, proved even more complex than she had expected. The pages were filled with formulas for calculating magical energy, diagrams of life force flows, and explanations of biochemical processes that had to be maintained during transformation. The coefficient of life energy conservation when changing biological form must account for the difference in metabolism of target organisms, she read aloud, trying to understand a complex formula. If EP equals the energy of the plant organism, and EA equals the energy of the animal, then the transformation coefficient K equals. Her head spun from the numbers and symbols. Lily had always been strong in practical magic, but such complex theory proved beyond her grasp. She tried to apply the formulas to her specific case, transforming a lily into a fish, but quickly became tangled in the calculations. At midnight, when her eyes were already closing from fatigue and fragments of formulas swirled in her head, Lily finally understood. She couldn't manage on her own. Even with the right books and theoretical knowledge, she lacked the experience to understand all the nuances, and only 2 days remained. The next morning at breakfast, Lily kept looking around the great hall, searching the Slytherin table with her gaze. Severus sat in his usual place at the end of the table, beside Avery and Mulciber. He looked pale and tired as always, his black hair falling untidily across his face. When their eyes met for a moment, Lily felt the familiar stab in her chest. Once this boy had been her best friend, the only person who understood her fascination with magic. Now between them lay a chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. But Professor Slughorn deserved a special gift. After breakfast, Lily gathered courage and caught up with Severus in the corridor leading to the dungeons. "Severus," she called quietly. He stopped and turned to her. There was no emotion on his face, only cold restraint. "Evans," he said shortly. "I need your help," Lily said directly, deciding not to beat around the bush. "With a complex magical task." Severus raised an eyebrow. "And why would you think I'd want to help you?" There was no anger in his voice, only cold interest. "Because it concerns Professor Slughorn," replied Lily. "I want to create a special gift for his birthday. Something that requires knowledge of theoretical magic." Something flashed in Severus's eyes, curiosity, perhaps even interest. "What exactly?" And Lily told him about her idea. Not about all the failed experiments, not about the conversation with McGonagall, but only about the basic concept. Transforming a lily flower into a fish using life essence transformation. Severus listened silently, only occasionally nodding to show he understood the task's complexity. "It's quite an ambitious project," he said finally. "Life essence transformation requires precise magical energy calculations. One mistake, and the result could be..." He paused, unpredictable. "I know," replied Lily. Professor McGonagall gave me books, but the theory is too complex for me, and only 2 days remain. Severus looked at her for a long time, and Lily could see a struggle taking place in his mind. Curiosity about the complex magical task versus personal grievances. The desire to help a beloved professor versus pride. "Show me the books," he said finally. They found an empty classroom, and Lily spread out on a desk all the books McGonagall had given her, along with her notes and calculation attempts. Severus quickly reviewed the material, his sharp mind instantly grasping the task's complexity. "You understood the basic principle correctly," he said, pointing to one of the diagrams. "But these formulas," he shook his head. "You're confusing the energy conservation coefficient with the transformation coefficient. And you're not accounting for the difference in life force density between plant and animal cells." The next hour Severus spent explaining the theory to her, correcting mistakes in calculations, and showing how to properly apply the formulas. His explanations were clear and comprehensible, and Lily again felt that intellectual harmony that had once united them. "But even with correct calculations," Severus said at the end, "practical implementation will be extraordinarily difficult. The stabilization spells must be maintained throughout the entire transformation, and this could take several hours." "Several hours?" Lily was aghast. "Life essence transformation is a gradual process," Severus explained. "You can't instantly change an organism's biological nature. The life processes must be gradually redirected, allowing cells to adapt to the new form." Lily felt hope leaving her again. "Then I won't manage in time. Only 1 day remains until the professor's birthday." Severus was quiet for a long time, looking at the open books. "There is one way to accelerate the process," he said finally. "If you use a double source of magical energy. 2 wizards working in synchronization can reduce the transformation time to several hours." Lily looked at him hopefully. "Will you help me?" Severus met her gaze, and for a moment it seemed the old trust had emerged between them again. "Professor Slughorn means a great deal to me," he said quietly. "He's the only one in this school who sees something more in me than just a poor boy from the outskirts. So you'll help?" Severus nodded. "Tomorrow evening after dinner. Find an empty classroom with good ventilation. The process may be accompanied by unusual smells and light effects." As they gathered the books, Lily felt the need to say something important. "Severus," she began, I'm grateful for the help, despite everything that's happened between us." He stopped, holding one of the books in his hands. "This isn't for you, Evans," he said without looking at her. "This is for Professor Slughorn. He deserves a special gift." But there was no former bitterness in his voice, and Lily allowed herself to hope that perhaps working on a common project would help heal at least part of the old wounds. She spent the rest of the day preparing for tomorrow evening. She found the perfect classroom on the 7th floor with large windows and good air circulation. She prepared all the necessary equipment: a glass jar for the aquarium, clean spring water, beautiful pebbles and water plants. And of course, the most beautiful white lily she could find in Professor Sprout's greenhouse. Tomorrow everything would be decided. Either she would succeed in creating the perfect gift for Professor Slughorn, or... But Lily didn't want to think about failure. Tomorrow she would work together with Severus, and together they would create something beautiful. For the sake of the professor who had believed in them both when they were still children, just discovering the wonders of the magical world. Tuesday swept past Lily as if in a fog. All day she felt a peculiar combination of nervous anticipation and focused determination. 1 day remained until Professor Slughorn's birthday, and this evening she faced the most complex magical work of her life. And not alone, together with Severus, with whom she hadn't worked on joint projects for nearly a year. During lessons she could barely concentrate. In potions, Professor Slughorn even asked if everything was all right with her, noticing that she had twice added ingredients in the wrong order. Lily hastily assured him that she was simply tired from night reading for a history of magic essay, but she could see his kindly eyes looking at her with concern. "My dear, don't overwork yourself," he said, gently touching her shoulder. "Health is more important than any marks." This care only strengthened her determination to create something special for such a kind person. In the evening, after dinner, Lily gathered all the necessary materials and headed to the 7th floor. The classroom she had chosen was spacious and bright even in the evening twilight. The tall windows admitted the last rays of sun setting behind the forbidden forest. She arranged all her equipment on the large table by the window: a glass jar for the future aquarium, a bottle of clean spring water, carefully selected pebbles of various sizes and colors, several sprigs of water plants, and most importantly, the most beautiful white lily she had been able to find in Professor Sprout's greenhouse. The flower was truly perfect, large, satin petals of gentle white with barely perceptible yellowish tinge near the base, a long sturdy stem, and fresh, delicate fragrance. Lily carefully placed it on soft fabric, so as not to damage it before the transformation began. Then she arranged the theory books McGonagall had given her and her notes with the calculations she and Severus had reworked the day before. The formulas seemed slightly less frightening now that she better understood the principles, but still demanded maximum concentration. When the clock on the wall struck 7, the classroom door opened quietly and Severus entered. He looked focused and somewhat tense, carrying a small bag containing what were obviously additional magical ingredients. "Evans," he greeted shortly, approaching the table. "Ready." "As ready as possible," replied Lily, feeling her heart accelerate with excitement. Severus examined the preparations and nodded approvingly. "Not bad, but we'll need several additional things." He untied his bag and drew out several small crystal bottles with differently colored powders. Silver root for life energy stabilization, ground moonstone to enhance transformation, and a bit of powdered unicorn horn for process purity. Lily looked at him in surprise. "Where did you get all this?" "Personal supplies," Severus replied restrainedly. "I collect rare ingredients." She didn't ask further, though she was curious how a sixth-year student had managed to obtain such expensive magical components. The next hour they spent preparing for the actual process. Severus explained each stage, showing how to properly hold the wand to maintain stabilization spells, how to synchronize their magical energy to avoid conflicts in their magical fields. "Remember," he said, arranging the crystal bottles around the flower in a specific pattern, life essence transformation isn't forceful conversion. It's more like persuasion. You must convince each cell of the flower that it can become part of a fish whilst retaining its life force. "And how exactly does one persuade a cell?" asked Lily, trying to understand. "Through empathy," replied Severus, and his voice took on a note of that fascination she remembered from childhood when he would tell her about complex magical concepts. "You must feel the flower's life, understand its essence, and then gently direct that essence into a new form. If you act roughly or hastily, the life force will simply dissipate." When all preparations were complete, darkness had already fallen outside, and the classroom was lit only by the soft light of several levitating candles that Severus had placed around the work table. The atmosphere became almost ceremonial, as if they were preparing for an important ritual. "We begin," said Severus, taking his wand in his right hand and placing his left palm on the table beside the flower. "Remember, I'll maintain stabilization whilst you guide the transformation. But we must work as one." Lily nodded and took position opposite him. She breathed deeply, trying to calm her nerves and focus on the task. In her hands was her wand, before her, a beautiful white lily that was to become a living fish. "Stabilitas vitae," Severus said quietly, and his wand glowed with soft silver light. Lily immediately felt a field of magical energy form around the flower, something warm and protective that enveloped the lily like an invisible cocoon. "Now you," whispered Severus. "Begin with feeling the life." Lily pointed her wand at the flower and closed her eyes, trying to feel what Severus had spoken of. At first there was nothing, only the ordinary awareness of the flower as an object. But gradually, as she concentrated more deeply, she began to sense something more. Life. It pulsed in the lily's stem, quietly and rhythmically like distant heartbeats. She could feel water rising through the roots up the stem, how solar energy accumulated during the day nourished each cell, how the petals breathed almost imperceptibly in the night air. "I can feel it," she whispered. "Good. Now begin gentle form transformation. Don't drive away the life, transform it. Mutatio vitae gentiles," pronounced Lily with the spell they had adapted together yesterday from McGonagall's book. The flower responded to the magic. Lily felt how its life force seemed to ask, "What do they want from it?" And she tried to explain, not with words, but with images and feelings. She imagined a small golden fish with delicate fins, playfully circling in clear water. She imagined how pleasant it would be for it to swim, how beautiful its scales would look in candlelight, how happily Professor Slughorn would smile upon seeing such an unusual gift. The lily's petals began to move almost imperceptibly, as if touched by an invisible breeze. But this wasn't wind. It was the flower's very life force beginning to take on a new form. "Excellent," whispered Severus, strengthening the stabilization spell. "Continue, but don't hurry." The next hour passed in intense concentration. Lily gradually guided the transformation, imagining each detail of the future fish, and felt how the lily's life force eagerly responded to her desire. The petals gradually changed form, becoming more rounded and taking on a golden tint. The stem shortened and thickened, transforming into a fish's body. But the most difficult part was transforming the very essence of life. Plant life differed from animal life not only in form, but in its way of existing. Lily had to convince cells accustomed to obtaining energy from the sun and nutrients from soil that they could now live in water, breathe through gills, and feed on what they found in water. "Now the most difficult part," warned Severus when the form transformation was nearly complete. "Adaptation of life processes. Hold tight to the spell." "Adaptatio biologica," pronounced Lily, feeling a powerful flow of magic stream through her wand. It was like touching the very foundations of life. Lily felt how microscopic processes inside the cells of the former flower were transforming. Photosynthesis changed to cellular respiration, root feeding to digestion through the mouth, motionless existence to the ability for movement. Severus held the stabilizing spells with such force that his face became covered with perspiration from the strain. The silver light of his wand pulsed in rhythm with the transformation, supporting the delicate process. And suddenly something went wrong. Lily felt the life force begin to fluctuate unstably, as if trying to return to its original state. "I can't hold it," she whispered, feeling the magical energy slip from her control. "Hold on," Severus said sharply. "I'll help." He extended his left hand and touched her palm that lay on the table. Instantly Lily felt a surge of additional magical power. Not her own, but Severus's, which harmoniously intertwined with her magic, strengthening and stabilizing the spell. It was a strange sensation, magical synchronization with another person. She felt not only his magical strength, but also part of his thoughts and emotions. Deep concentration, the desire to help and care. Care for her and for the success of their project. With their combined forces, the transformation proceeded successfully. The life force stabilized in its new form, and on the table instead of a white lily lay a small golden fish with delicate translucent fins and large, intelligent eyes. But it wasn't moving yet. It was alive, Lily could feel this, but needed its natural environment. "Quickly into the water," said Severus, releasing her hand and lifting the stabilizing spells. Lily carefully took the fish in her palms. It was warm and pulsed almost imperceptibly, and lowered it into the prepared aquarium. For a moment the fish lay motionless on the bottom amongst the beautiful pebbles, and Lily feared something had gone wrong. And then the fish moved a fin, then another. And suddenly, with an elegant movement, it rose from the bottom and began circling in the water, as if dancing with joy at existence. "We did it," whispered Lily, looking at her creation with reverence. The fish was beautiful. Its golden body shimmered in the candlelight. Its translucent fins moved with grace reminiscent of lily petals swaying in the breeze. But most importantly, it was real. Alive. It swam, explored its new home, occasionally rising to the surface as if trying to understand the new world around it. "She's beautiful," said Severus, and genuine admiration sounded in his voice. "And stable. The life force has adapted well to the new form." Lily turned to him, and for the first time in many months saw a genuine smile on his face, not mocking or bitter, but sincere and warm. "Thank you," she said. "Without you I could never have done this." "The idea was yours," he replied. "I only helped with the technical part." They stood together, watching the fish swim happily amongst the water plants, and Lily felt that something had changed between them. Not that their old friendship had been restored, too much had happened for that. But this joint work, this moment of magical harmony when their powers had united to create something beautiful, reminded them both of what had once bound them together. "Professor Slughorn will be delighted," said Severus quietly. "I hope so," replied Lily. "He deserves something special." They observed the fish a bit longer, as it seemed to explore every corner of its new home. Then Severus began gathering his things. "I must go," he said. "It's late, and tomorrow there are lessons early." "Severus," Lily called when he had reached the door. He turned. I remember what kind of friends we were," she said. "And I wanted you to know, what we did together tonight reminded me of the best moments of our friendship." Severus looked at her for a long time, and Lily could see various emotions battling in his eyes. That friendship ended, Evans, he said finally, but without former harshness. We've both changed, become different people. Perhaps so, agreed Lily. But that doesn't mean we can't respect each other, or that we can't create something beautiful together when needed. Severus was quiet for several seconds, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Good night, Evans. I hope Professor Slughorn appreciates your gift. When he left, Lily remained alone with her creation. She sat on a chair by the table and watched the fish, which seemed to have already grown accustomed to its new life. Sometimes it would swim up to the glass wall and look at Lily with large, intelligent eyes, as if trying to understand who this person was who had given it a new form of existence. Hello, beauty, whispered Lily, pressing her palm to the glass. Tomorrow you'll live with Professor Slughorn. He's a kind person, he'll take care of you. The fish seemed to understand and playfully circled near her hand. Lily looked at her gift and felt deep satisfaction, not only from having succeeded in creating something beautiful, but from the fact that this process had reminded her of the power of magic that could be created when people worked together towards a common goal, even such people as had hurts and misunderstandings between them. Tomorrow Professor Slughorn would receive his gift, a unique fish created from a lily flower by the magic of two of his students who, despite all differences, had been able to unite their forces to express gratitude to a kind teacher. Lily sat by the aquarium for a long time, watching her creation in the soft candlelight, feeling pride in the completed work and quiet joy from knowing that tomorrow she would be able to repay Professor Slughorn for all his kindness and support. Wednesday began with gentle morning sunlight breaking through the clouds and promising a fine day. Lily woke earlier than usual, but felt refreshed and filled with anticipation. Today was Professor Slughorn's birthday, and she finally had a gift worthy of his kindness. She had carefully moved the aquarium with the fish to her dormitory late the previous evening, and now, in the morning light, the gift looked even more beautiful. The golden fish swam merrily amongst the water plants, its translucent fins moving gracefully in the water, and its scales shimmered with every shade of gold and copper. When a sunbeam touched the water, the fish seemed to glow from within, creating a magical play of light and shadow. "Good morning, beauty," whispered Lily, approaching the aquarium. "Ready to meet your new master?" The fish swam to the edge of the glass and seemed to nod to her, which made Lily smile. Perhaps it was only her imagination, but it seemed the creature understood the importance of this day. At breakfast, Lily barely touched her food, feeling excitement mingle with joyful anticipation. Professor Slughorn sat at the high table in his usual place, cheerfully conversing with Professor Flitwick about something that made both teachers laugh. He looked particularly uplifted that morning, obviously delighted by his birthday. "You're hardly eating anything again," observed Marlene McKinnon, sitting down beside her. "And you look as though you're preparing for something important." "You could say that," Lily smiled mysteriously. "I simply want to do something special today for a very kind person." Marlene raised an eyebrow with interest but didn't press further. She already knew that when Lily had such a determined expression, it was better not to interfere. The first lessons of the day passed sluggishly. In Transfiguration, Lily could barely restrain herself from telling Professor McGonagall about the successful completion of her project, but decided to keep the secret until the moment of gift presentation. The professor seemed to notice her elevated mood and glanced at her several times with curiosity, but said nothing. In defense against the dark arts, Professor Quirrell was once again muttering something about protective charms, but Lily was thinking only about how best to present her gift. Should she do it publicly, in front of other students? Or would it be better to find a private moment so the professor could calmly appreciate the gift's symbolism? She decided to wait until the end of the day. Usually Professor Slughorn lingered in his office after the last lesson, tidying potions and preparing for the next day. This would be the perfect time for a personal conversation, but the most difficult part of the day proved to be the potions lesson itself. Seeing Professor Slughorn, who treated all students with such kindness, telling his favorite anecdotes and praising their successes, while simultaneously hiding her gift, was almost unbearable. "Today we shall brew a euphoria elixir," he announced at the lesson's beginning, his eyes gleaming with pleasure. "Not to use it, that would be cheating, but to understand how magic can affect our emotions." Lily brewed the potion with particular care, thinking that she needed no magical potions to feel joy this day. Joy from successfully completing a difficult task, from creating something beautiful, and from the opportunity to repay her beloved professor filled her heart naturally and sincerely. "Excellent work, Miss Evans," said Professor Slughorn, approaching her cauldron. Perfect golden color and delicate vanilla aroma. You demonstrate, as always, exceptional understanding of the art of potion making. Thank you, Professor, replied Lily, feeling her cheeks burn with pleasure. You've taught me so much. Professor Slughorn smiled warmly and patted her shoulder. And you, my dear, fulfill all my hopes. I'm confident you have a brilliant future in whatever field you choose. These words only strengthened Lily's determination to make this day special for the person who so believed in her. When the bell rang announcing the end of the final lesson, Lily quickly gathered her things and headed to her dormitory. The aquarium with the fish was waiting for her, and the creature seemed to sense its creator's excitement. It swam faster circles than usual, and its golden scales shimmered particularly brightly. Time to meet Professor Slughorn, whispered Lily, carefully taking the aquarium in her hands. On the way to the dungeons, she encountered several yearmates who looked curiously at the unusual aquarium, but no one dared ask what it was for. Lily walked with determined steps, feeling her heart beat faster with anticipation. The door to Professor Slughorn's office was open, and from within came sounds of quiet humming. Obviously, he was stirring some potion. Lily knocked on the open door. Professor, may I come in? Of course, of course. Slughorn responded cheerfully. Do come in, my dear. The professor's office always impressed Lily with its atmosphere of coziness and magic. Everywhere stood shelves with multicolored bottles, rare ingredients, and interesting magical artifacts. In the corner bubbled several cauldrons with different potions, creating a pleasant background hum. On the walls hung portraits of Slughorn's former students who had achieved success in various fields of the magical world, and by the window grew exotic plants necessary for the most complex potions. Professor Slughorn stood by his work table, stirring something in a large copper cauldron. When he saw Lily with the aquarium in her hands, his eyebrows rose in surprise. Oh, Miss Evans, what an interesting aquarium. And what a beautiful fish. He approached closer to examine the creature that was playfully circling in the water. Golden with such delicate fins. I've never seen such a breed. Where is she from? Lily took a deep breath, preparing for the most important part of her plan. Professor, today is your birthday, and I wanted to give you something special. Something that would show how grateful I am for all your kindness and support. She carefully placed the aquarium on the free part of his table. This fish, she was created by magic, from a white lily flower. Professor Slughorn froze, looking alternately at the fish and at Lily. From a lily flower? He repeated. My dear, do you mean to say that? Yes, Professor. I used transformation of life essence to convert a lily flower, my namesake, into a living fish. This is symbolic. My name, transformed by magic into something living and beautiful as a gift to you. Professor Slughorn was speechless with amazement. He sat in his armchair and looked for a long time at the fish, which, as if understanding the importance of the moment, swam elegantly through the center of the aquarium, displaying the beauty of its golden forms. Miss Evans, he said finally, genuine admiration sounding in his voice. This is incredible. Life essence transformation is master-level magic. How did you? I studied a great deal, Lily replied modestly. Professor McGonagall gave me theory books, and Severus Snape helped with stabilization spell calculations. Snape? Slughorn was surprised. Ah, yes, of course. The boy has exceptional talent for theoretical magic. But even with his help, my dear, you've created a living creature. Professor Slughorn rose and approached the aquarium. The fish swam to the wall and seemed to look at him with her large, intelligent eyes. She's truly alive, he whispered with reverence. And so beautiful. Look how gracefully she moves, how her scales shimmer. And these fins remind me of lily petals. That's exactly what I wanted, said Lily, feeling joy overflow her heart. For her to preserve something of her original nature. Professor Slughorn was quiet for a long time, watching the fish. Then he turned to Lily, and she saw his eyes gleaming with emotion. Miss Evans. Lily, he said quietly. In all my years of teaching, I've received countless gifts from students. Expensive books, rare ingredients, beautiful artifacts. But no one has ever given me something created with their own hands and their own heart. He approached her and gently placed his hands on her shoulders. You haven't simply created a beautiful creature. You've embodied in magic your gratitude, your love of learning, your desire to create beauty in the world. This is the most precious gift I've ever received. Lily felt tears of joy fill her eyes. I so wanted to create something special for you, Professor. You've done so much for me. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You showed me that heritage doesn't matter if there's a desire for knowledge and creativity in one's heart. And you, my dear, have shown me that I wasn't mistaken in you, replied Professor Slughorn, also wiping moist eyes. This gift is proof that you've grown into a true which who not only possesses magic, but understands its deepest essence. He turned back to the aquarium, where the fish continued to swim playfully amongst the water plants. What do you think we should call her? He asked. Lily became thoughtful. What about Aurora? She suggested. It means dawn, like the beginning of a new day, new possibilities. Aurora, repeated Professor Slughorn, savoring the sound of the name. A wonderful name for such a marvelous creature. Aurora will live here on my desk, and each time I look at her, she'll remind me of one of the most talented and kindest students I've been fortunate to teach. They watched Aurora for some time more as she seemed to explore her new home. Professor Slughorn told Lily about how he would arrange the aquarium in his office, where best to place it so the fish would be comfortable. He was so delighted with the gift that he planned to show it to some colleagues, especially Professor McGonagall. She'll be impressed by the level of magic you've demonstrated, he said. Life essence transformation is truly advanced magic. When Lily finally prepared to leave, Professor Slughorn thanked her once more for the gift. You know, Lily, he said as she reached the door, this gift has reminded me why I fell in love with teaching. To see young wizards discover their talents, learn to create beauty and good in the world, this is the greatest joy for a teacher. Thank you, Professor, replied Lily. For everything. Leaving the dungeons, Lily felt incredible lightness and satisfaction. The mission was accomplished. Professor Slughorn had received his special gift, and his reaction had exceeded all her expectations. She hadn't simply repaid him for his kindness. She had shown what she had learned under his guidance, how she had grown as a witch. In the Great Hall, dinner was already being served, and Lily saw that at the high table Professor Slughorn was animatedly telling Professor Flitwick something, gesturing with excitement. Obviously, he couldn't restrain himself, and had already told someone about his unusual gift. At the Gryffindor table, Lily noticed Severus at the Slytherin table. When their eyes met, he nodded to her almost imperceptibly, and she smiled in response. Between them there wasn't the warmth of former friendship, but there was respect and recognition of work well done together. After dinner, Lily went to the library, where she found a quiet corner by the window and sat with a book. But she didn't feel like reading. She simply sat, looked at the starry sky, and felt deep satisfaction from the completed task. She had understood something important about the nature of true magic. It wasn't only technique and knowledge, though they were certainly important. True magic was born when technical mastery combined with love, with the desire to create good and beauty, with readiness to give part of oneself for others. Her gift to Professor Slughorn had been an embodiment of this philosophy. The lily flower, transformed by magic into a living fish, had become a symbol of how ordinary things could be transformed into something beautiful if one put heart and soul into it. And she had also understood that even broken relationships could find new embodiment when people united for a common noble purpose. Her collaboration with Severus hadn't restored their friendship, but had shown that the past needn't completely determine the future. Late that evening, returning to her dormitory, Lily stopped to look at Professor Slughorn's office. The door was closed, but soft light showed through the crack under the door. She imagined how the professor sat at his desk, watching Aurora and smiling, remembering this special day. Falling asleep that night, Lily felt deep peace and joy. She had created something beautiful, repaid a kind person, and learned much new about herself and about magic. And somewhere in the castle dungeons, a golden fish named Aurora swam in her new home, a living symbol of gratitude, creativity, and love of life. This had been a gift from the heart, created by the heart, and it would forever remain a reminder of how important it is to value good people and not be afraid to create beauty in the world, even if it requires great effort and overcoming pride. Professor Slughorn deserved such a gift, and Lily was happy she had been able to create it. Years passed like pages in an old book. Lily Evans became Lily Potter, then a mother, then part of a legend told in whispers within Hogwarts walls. Professor Slughorn gradually aged. His hair became silver and his hands less steady, but Aurora always swam in her aquarium on his desk, golden and graceful, just as on that first day. He told every new generation of students about her, about the girl who had created a living fish from a lily flower, about magic born from gratitude and love. And each time, looking at Aurora, He remembered Lily's bright green eyes and her smile on that unforgettable birthday. But even the most powerful magic has its limits, and life has its laws. One quiet spring morning, when sunlight gently illuminated the office through misted windows, Professor Slughorn found a wondrous thing on the water's surface. Instead of Aurora, there floated a beautiful white lily, as perfect as the one from which she had once been born. The petals were silky and tender, and the fragrance filled the room with memories of youth and friendship. The old professor wept, quietly, as those weep who have lived through many losses and learned to treasure each moment of beauty in the world. He understood what had happened. The magic that had kept Aurora alive had been connected to the life of the one who had created her. And Lily was no more. He grieved for Aurora, for the years that had passed, for the girl who had given him this miracle and who had departed from life so early. He carefully drew the flower from the water and pressed it to his heart, feeling how the years disappeared, and he again saw young Lily Evans, standing by his desk with an aquarium in her hands and glowing with happiness. Aurora had returned to her first life, but the magic that had created her, the love and gratitude she had embodied, remained forever. In the old professor's heart, in the stories he told, in memories of the girl who had shown him that true magic lives not in spells, but in the desire to bring joy to others. And when the evening sun set beyond the horizon, Professor Slughorn placed the white lily in a vase by the window, where it could catch the morning light, and whispered, "Thank you, Lily, for everything.